All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerry Cuomo. I'm from IBM, and I'm the Vice President for Blockchain Technologies. We're co-founders of the Hyperledger project, which is an open source project for building blockchain suitable for business applications. And we've had a crazy and wonderful year working with, I could say, hundreds of clients around the world applying blockchain technologies to their business. I'd love to talk to you about it more, but pass it on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Joseph Lubin. I'm one of the founders of the Ethereum project, and once I felt that was well underway, founded a company called ConsenSys to build decentralized applications, also known as smart contract-based applications for the public Ethereum blockchain. We built lots of the infrastructure for the Ethereum ecosystem for public Ethereum as well as private permissioned Ethereum. And about half of our 130-person company focuses on consulting private permissioned installations.
I'm Jeff Garzik, co-founder and CEO of Bloq. I already had a very generous introduction from Matt. In terms of smart contracts, we, as an enterprise blockchain solution company, deal with both the micro-focused smart contracts that you see in the Bitcoin blockchain and larger, more programmable DApp type contracts like you see in Ethereum or Bloq. So we look at it both from a very low level as well as a very, very high level.
I'm Mark Smith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Symbiont, and I'm also proud to be the technology chair of the Smart Contract Alliance. So hat tip to my co-chair in the back. So you didn't get a seat. How is that possible? At Symbiont, we have developed a novel smart contract platform that's specifically focused on solving problems in capital markets.
And I'm Marley Gray. I am on the Microsoft blockchain engineering team, and we are currently, we went to market last year with working with ConsenSys over here on Ethereum and making that more accessible towards enterprises. And we have subsequently been working on building infrastructure to allow for customers and partners to build blockchain-based smart contract applications on any blockchain platform, not just Ethereum, and really start to deliver on the vision of the paper that was distributed today.
Good, thank you, gentlemen. I'm realizing we don't have a woman on stage, so next time we need a woman on stage. Brilliant, okay.
Caitlin, do you want to swap out?
Yeah.
Well, you got a chance. You can make it even. No? You sure? I'm happy to sit. No?
So, and I guess I'll do a quick introduction as well of Deloitte. So I lead our Deloitte activities around blockchain worldwide, especially focusing on financial services. We have about 300 people working on blockchain projects today. We've done 30 proof of concept for clients, and we are doing a lot of work, like my friend Jerry here, for different industries. So the first question is, and I was talking about my teenage daughters earlier, because I told them this weekend I was going to do this panel, and I said I'm going to talk about smart contracts. And then I started to realize it's very hard to explain to my teenage daughter what smart contract is about. I try to do one about them driving effectively, efficiently, safely on the road. And I couldn't find a good example. So any one of you can help me with a definition of smart contract for teenagers. Joe, you have teenagers.
Smart contracts for teenagers. Now my son's much older than that, actually. So essentially, let me define a decentralized application. A decentralized application is just an application. It has a front end that you would recognize, either a web front end or a mobile front end, and it hits a back end. So the back end can be hybrid. It can have a traditional database as its backend, or it can have objects on a blockchain, either public blockchain or a private permission blockchain, that basically serve as that object database backend. So most of these decentralized applications are hybrid that we're seeing, actually, where you have certain elements that hit the traditional database and elements that require consensus or transparency or non-repudiability that hit the blockchain-based backend.
So it's a hybrid solution. Anyone else wants to try?
Yeah, I mean, as a dad of a teenager daughter, I think when my teenage daughter goes into a bar and she's asked, she's carded, from an identity perspective, I can imagine a blockchain managing the verification of citizens' identity. It would be nice that the bouncer was only able to see her age and not her address, because I don't want the bouncer going to her house to meet her later, right? So blockchain could help set up a decentralized identity verification system that will make the world safer for dads like myself, because I don't think my daughter really cares, but I do as a dad.
Does she like to shop?
She likes to shop too.
Yeah. So why not, an on-demand debit card where if she does all her homework, it automatically triggers a payment.
There you go.
I like that.
Spend.
All right, I'll use this one.
There
Thank
you go.
you. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
I like to try to focus, or not focus, but define it in a tweet. That's, if you could really boil it down to 140 characters, that's a pretty decent definition. And for smart contracts, I look at it from the automation perspective. It's a set of rules that can be evaluated by an automated system, a computer, where all the parties agree to a common set of rules. And so it's very much a computer version of an English language, a legal contract. And that's pretty much it. That covers the Ethereum side, that covers the Bitcoin side, that covers domain-specific languages, very, very specific smart contracts. And so it's all about evaluation and automation, I tend to think.
Okay. So maybe one thing that I think we are all struggling with when we talk to our clients and when we talk to my teenage daughters is what's unique about blockchain. A smart contract, like Nick said, can be applied without a blockchain platform. What's unique about blockchain that actually triggers the activities that we are talking about today, and we've been talking about that for a year?
So blockchain enables a set of actors, again, whether it's a public context or a private permission context, because they have access to the data, direct access to the data, because they have access to the business logic that operates on the data, they can be certain that no minority set of actors can improperly manipulate the data or the business logic in the case of Ethereum. And so essentially it represents a shared source of truth where different actors with different agendas can operate on the same shared infrastructure and trust each other or trust the system and work more fluidly together and reduce redundancy.
Yeah, if I can add, I think by having your contract also itself reside on the blockchain, there is there's a visibility and kind of a provenance perspective to it. So I can actually see the contract as a participant in this decentralized network, and it's predictable what it's doing on my behalf. Right? And whether it's version 1, version 2, or version 7 of that contract, I can actually watch the kind of the evolution of that contract go, and I actually know what it's doing on my behalf without any doubt. It's immutable.
I like to think of it as blockchain in its initial form was originally about shared truth, and having that immutable authenticity of creating value and being able to transfer value and not just copies of things. So it was the whole cryptocurrency use case created that sort of shared data plane that we all agreed that this data plane can be trusted, and we all agree, and we don't have to reconcile between ourselves. What smart contracts really does is it raises it up a little bit, that trust level, not necessarily the trust level, the distributed resolution of the truth. So smart contracts, not just, a blockchain stores the truth, right? It says, here's the truth, and we'll move on and we'll build on that truth so that you have historical truth that you can go back and track provenance and lineage and all that good stuff. Smart contracts essentially says, okay, now we want to be able to share the truth resolution and be able to have in the open how we derived that truth so that counterparties can come together and create this collaborative economy where smart contracts can do things outside of a single organization and start to do things like bring the supply chain together in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Yeah, I would say that, and maybe this scares some of the attorneys in the room, is blockchains are really adjudication as a service. Is that what a blockchain does is it validates rules that are common to that entire blockchain. It's a neutral level playing field for all the actors connecting to that blockchain network. And in the context of smart contracts, there's a validation step that validates that actors have performed according to the smart contract rules on that blockchain. And so it's very much a hyper real-time version of even the court system. There's adjudication, did this actor perform in this legal contract? We have to go through a specified process. Blockchains automate that. They essentially automate the evaluation of law, the execution of those performances related to that law or that rule. And so adjudication as a service.
Interesting, thank you. By the way, we'll save some time at the end for questions, so get ready for your questions. I'm going to have a question for you about the killer app. But before we go there, we talked about the challenges and why smart contracts are not present in every industry today. Why are we not there yet? And we talk about regulation and legal and technology changes. What can you tell us about why we are not in a state where pretty much everybody is using smart contracts?
They're not appropriate in all cases, first of all. I think that's an important piece. I think that's the issue we got into with blockchain in and of itself. There was this magic bullet and everyone got very excited about distributed ledger blockchain technology, and now we're in a state where we realize, okay, it's good for certain things, it's not great for everything, and it should be applied where it should be applied and not applied where it shouldn't. So the same thing, I think, occurs with smart contracts. There are certain places where it's applicable. I think there was some confusion early on when this concept was the code is the contract. And that then started to create a lot of distrust amongst the participants on whether or not is the code the contract, and if it's not, then what is supposed to happen and how, and why is this a contract? I know some people have the funny long-running joke that they're not smart and they're not contracts. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not. But there are specific applications where there is value, and there are specific applications where traditional contractual law and contractual environment should take precedence and will continue to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it. In fact, as even in 2016, we've seen the way to express smart contracts evolve. I think we have another announcement today from Chain, IBM, Microsoft. Many of us have been working on ways to kind of elevate the expression of a contract. But right now, for the most part, contract is code. And I don't know how many lawyers out there read, Go or Java or C#, right? So it's that translation between many of the platforms out there today, or Solidity, they're written in some computer language, not in a legal language. So someone has to translate that boundary. And I think one of the things that's slowing us down a bit as an industry is that. Now, we've seen already interpreters who read computer code and translate the contract in that code into whether it's meeting a regulation or a law, et cetera. We've already seen banks and others put these third parties in place to do the interpretation between the two. So where there's a will, there's a way, and it's happening here.
So it's a very young technology. Until 2009, there was no way to guarantee that a smart contract could execute, basically until the advent of the Bitcoin technology. On the consumer front, it is maturing, but it's still very young. We at ConsenSys and many other entities in the space are building a wide variety of applications, foundational things like identity to build this new infrastructure, this new ecosystem, basically a decentralized World Wide Web. And while that's going on, that's going to take a few years. We and many others are doing the private permission system so that we can, in a certain context, build smart contract systems that companies can use, that consortia can use, and in those contexts, you can guarantee that smart contracts will operate. And so it's a brand new tech, and actually even more on the enterprise side, there's tremendous excitement. So there's lots being built.
I think one of the things was it's hard to get your head around sometimes. So we talk to people, and a lot of times they have a hard time unlearning some of the things that they've been brought up to do. They've learned a business process, and sometimes it's best thing to do is to completely destroy a business process and say, what are you trying to do? And it was take it back to the basics, and we use the example all the time about people exchanging value. What does that mean? And go back to the early days and bartering. So I'm going to give you this chicken for that piece of wood. And it was a pretty simple barter, and it was very simple. I mean, you actually got a hold of the physical items, and blockchain and smart contracts can facilitate that exact exchange of actual value, which across organizational boundaries, which is very difficult to get your head around. You need a lot of moving parts, like identity is key, and things like that. But I think, just from people thinking about business processes and unlearning, this structure that we've built up. I mean, look at the payments ecosystem. Look at any ecosystem that's grown over the decades, and it's just fraught with friction that doesn't necessarily need to be there anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the real answer. Is ultimately it's a young technology. It's sort of very early 1990s internet, et cetera. But fundamentally, when you're changing business processes, that's what takes time. You have to rethink your individual business-to-business relationships, business-to-customer relationships. How will those change? The fundamentals of business are way above technology to how we interact on a day-to-day basis.
I have to just agree with this, because earlier in the year when you talked about smart contracts and blockchain, it was almost like throwing it in there like, do you want fries with that? And when folks really started to step back and think about business processes like KYC and AML as a decentralized sport, a team sport versus mano a mano or one-on-one or just by yourself, it completely changes the possibility of how you do a KYC and AML. Like us, maybe in the 6 steps that are part of that contract, 4 members of the network already did those. And if I trust those 4, then I only have to do 2 steps, right? And that's a really different way of thinking about it. So there's an opportunity out there as well with smart contracts to really reimagine business processes, not just, add it on or, keep doing the way you're doing it. I mean, there's really a chance to kind of disrupt and rethink how these processes work.
Yeah. So there is another image that I think that's useful, right? So when we started to do contracts before blockchain, we shared a common media. It was a piece of paper, and we were signing the same piece of paper. The issue I have today is if I do a smart contract on Bluemix Hyperledger, and then a smart contract on Ethereum, and then a smart contract on Bloq, and then on Symbiont, how does that work? I mean, that we have a challenge here. We have a challenge of standards, right? What's your point?
Why? Why? I mean, right now today you can pick 60 venues to execute a stock order in, and all of them execute differently, and you get the same outcome. You get a fill. We're not going to have one unique flavor, or actually, one generic flavor. We're going to have a lot of unique flavors, and there's going to be purpose for those flavors. We have the most generic form of a contract: offer, acceptance, consideration. Right? No one thinks about that's what we're going to build everything off of. You have different ways of getting to a different conclusion for different purposes, and so I think it's fostering innovation. I think one of the challenges of the Smart Contract Alliance is really around let's not run too far ahead and try to standardize too early. We need to innovate. We need to dig in the hole and stick our head up and see where are we. And then we all need to dig our own holes. And eventually we're going to pick some that we all kind of collaborate around. And when I was a partner in Lava Trading and we were building the platform, the biggest word we used was coopetition. Right? We see people, we need to work with them, but we're going to compete as well. If we're all on one homogeneous platform and one standard, where's the competition in that, right? We need unique places to create value propositions. That's how this will become ubiquitous, not if we all try to do the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, very much agree with that. It's still very early in this ecosystem, and our different groups need to set off in different directions and explore the solution space. We need to build different systems that are fit for different purposes. Different use cases will sit on different architectures, and we will build layers that enable interoperation. Ethereum can currently interoperate with the Bitcoin blockchain. We can track transactions and validate them on Ethereum. We built the same thing for Zcash, which will be enabled at the next major iteration of Ethereum. So Interledger is another project that's looking at the same thing. So we've got layers and layers to build on top of these foundational systems.
And you can have bridge oracles that can communicate amongst different ledgers, and we can create trusted environments where we understand that data can actually be used in different ways. That's the future. It's not one kind of big blob that we all kind of sit and deal with.
Yeah, it's very much the innovation cycle, as the other panelists have pointed out. Right now, people are figuring out what can you do with smart contracts, and so we're still very much in that stage. But I can tell you that the auditors, the audit firms, are very much looking forward to. It's not going to be one standard smart contract, but there will be standardized sets, standardized templates, just like there are templates in the legal field, for common situations. They're on smart contracts, whether it's a private blockchain or an Ethereum or a Bitcoin. The technology is really irrelevant. What's going to bubble up are these standard contract template libraries that auditors, that industry participants are familiar with. They understand, they've evaluated the outside the technology space legal implications, as well as the inside the technology space evaluation, and come to a common agreement. Yes, we understand this. Yes, we can audit it. So the audit firms are very excited about this near real-time adjudication feature and the process of possibility of standardizing what is currently in the innovative phase, these smart contracts.
Yeah, I was going to say that, don't let lack of standardization halt the innovation, because we will have different flavors, and it is a good thing. And we talked about, we'll have common interoperability standards. So we'll be able to and we're building some of this, and we're pulling in the BTC relay, the Ethereum to Bitcoin, and the interledger stuff, and putting it in a place where it's easily, you'll be able to move assets between blockchains. But more importantly, what you'll be able to do, the interoperability, is we start to see these standard contract templates, is you'll be able to chain them together in cross-organizational workflows that really create a distributed system that is unfathomable. I'd say that 5 times in a row. Like 5 years ago, where we could start to have an end-to-end supply chain in all industries. It would be amazingly efficient way to do that, and cross different blockchains along the way. But everyone working together. I think that's more a better way to proceed. If we tried to standardize now, we wouldn't get anywhere.
We're starting to get excited about formal verification.
Yeah.
I think formal verification is where everyone can sort of get together and say, okay, yeah, we're going to do this a different way, but here's how we verify that the code we're releasing to the wild is acceptable, and we know we're going to get deterministic outcomes from it. And that's a place I think where we can get together.
I'll just throw my agreement in that there's not going to one blockchain to rule them all, nor will there be one smart contract language to rule them all. I will say on the other side, there are attempts to at least put like minds together. I mean, the Hyperledger project is a good example of that. We now actually reached 100. We have 100 participants now that are part of Hyperledger project. And again, the goal there is not to create a uniform blockchain, at least not today, but it's to start looking at what it means to, what are the, let's say, the legal licensing aspects of the code that's in there. What is the interop between the technologies there? What are the maturity model for the code that's there? So at least providing a framework for how folks could start reasoning about the code. Not that we're saying there should be one to rule them all, but at least a place where we can start vetting how we all kind of collaborate together. So I want to invite all of the panelists to come and join in on the Hyperledger project, because we're just dying to have you there.
We're one of the 100.
Yeah,
we're
good.
We're one of the 100 as well.
We'll see you Thursday.
We're one of the 100.
So thank you. So 2 more questions before we go to the audience. And I think the first one is, there is no good panel if you all agree all the time on all topics. So on what topic do you disagree around smart contracts?
I would say let's kick it over to Mark, because this comes for the blockchain, non-blockchain philosophical divide. Can blockchains exist, or can smart contracts exist outside of blockchain?
Certainly they can. Should they?
Softball question for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly can. I mean, as Nick pointed out, they certainly can. I think we've actually run ours on a MySQL database just to see what happens. But you don't get the bang for your buck you're looking for, right? So I think it's a requirement to have a truly distributed and decentralized ledger that they can reside upon. I hasten not to use the term blockchain, because I believe that is a term of art. It specifically means a certain type of distributed ledger, Ethereum and Bitcoin being the two included in that. What we do at Symbiont is not a blockchain. We don't profess it to be one. It's a distributed ledger that uses Byzantine fault tolerant, a different type of Byzantine fault tolerance, BFT Smart.
Say that 4 times.
Yeah, there you go. I've already got my tongue twisted. So I think some of the places where we may disagree is in this idea of which types of environments should financial contracts be run on. At Symbiont, we are very ardent in our belief that open permissionless ledgers that are rooted in crypto economics that use those structures are not appropriate for financial applications. They're fantastically appropriate for other things, but not for financial applications. And as such, smart contracts are extremely dangerous, as evidenced by the DAO. And I know someone had to mention it. I'll be the first to mention it. It's the proof point of how we can do things better, and it was part of the driving reason why we rushed to push the Smart Contract Alliance forward. We did not want the same branding problem that Bitcoin had. Bitcoin is one of the most beautiful things that's ever been developed in this world and probably ever will be, but it had a horrible first birth and branding. And we at Symbiont, who've been building this novel smart contract platform since 2014, were very scared that all of a sudden smart contracts would get sucked into that kind of thought process. So I've answered a question maybe not was asked, but I don't know if that will create some friction or not.
Yeah,
but the ConsenSys guys will now tell me that I'm wrong.
Not a lot of friction, but 2 points to make. One, and a very minor point, Byzantine fault-tolerant systems don't scale very well.
Ours scales extremely well, as already demonstrated academically. So I think we actually have the fastest and the most scaling.
Yeah,
ledger
good point. In a centralized client-server sort of situation, yes, that does make sense. But I would argue that...
But we are truly distributed and truly decentralized, so there is no centralization to our platform.
I'm trying to add some controversy.
You're provoking controversy, so
exactly.
I'm happy to oblige.
So the big point that I want to make is that blockchain systems are valuable for companies. If you view a company as a collection of cooperating and competing groups, they're all feeding from the same budget. It's like a microcosm of society. So it does make sense to put business processes in a corporate context on the blockchain. And you can have your employees, your vendor service providers, your customers all interact in this same secure infrastructure. If you get to a situation where you have a use case with a counterparty that doesn't want to use your infrastructure, that's appropriate for a consortium or a partner blockchain system. I would argue that companies, consortia, will eventually want to have use cases that are either fully on a public blockchain or that are splayed across corporate, partner, and public blockchain. And so currently, there's really only one option for that, so it may not make sense for you to build a bunch of components or buy a bunch of components for your corporate use cases or your consortium use cases if you're going to have to build the same stack in the future for your public blockchain use cases.
Yeah, I think the value of public blockchains, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum, you can use the analogy of the core internet, and then each company has an intranet. But this would be more of a consortium where you might use a public network as a backplane for interoperability between two blockchains that have no natural way of communicating. There's things but I agree with you. I mean, there's things that smart contracts, we need to change the definition and make it more of a concept instead of thinking of it as just solidity running within a virtual machine. It needs to have separation of concerns where we have the ability to define schema. We have logic that is data logic can reside near the schema, but we also have business logic that might need to be raised up. And then we're building a system around extending the trust envelope using novel computational infrastructure called enclaves to start to look at these types of things. The thing that I'd like to stress is there shouldn't be one simple way to write a smart contract. I think we need to have, as software architects, we need flexibility. We need the ability to say, for this use case, this type of blockchain is most suitable, and it makes more sense for us to run our logic in a centralized way that's fault tolerant, redundant, everybody trusts. Like in an Oracle, we call them cryptlets, and they write down to the blockchain, and so we need flexibility and smart contracts, and I think you'll find a little bit of debate there from, and that's mostly on private blockchains. So to allow people to architect systems based on the functional and non-functional requirements.
Yeah, just I wish I had something more controversial, but I have to agree with some of the things being said here. But we have some really pragmatic encounters that we're doing. Like IBM is running right now between our business partners something called part of our global finance network. We're running a shared ledger, and it's to manage disputes across our lending network. And it's interesting how, when you look at the dynamics of, there's like $100 million at any given time on this ledger that's held up in disputes. So a lot of the contract, language on that ledger is to, if something goes wrong, how do you manage that? Now, as I was saying earlier, none of our business partners understand that. So part of the governance of that network, whether it's private or public, is that there is the members involved understand how that network is governed. Yeah. And right now, given the maturity of where we are, governance is done through meetings and explanations, and this is a very manual way of going about business. But it works. We're in production with this network as we speak. And again, it's taking money, freeing up that liquidity. We're also doing work with, you probably saw an announcement with Walmart and their supply chain network around food quality, mangoes and pork. And again, the audience involved with that, it's a very manual set of conversations. The governance and the legality around how this works today is embodied in code. It's embodied in contracts. And what we're doing is kind of binding the code and contracts together, literally in some cases, encrypting the contract or creating a hash of the contract and tacking it to the actual smart contract. So again, it's probably going to be a few years before these things start translating on their own. Until then, the world is moving quite swiftly, with or without perfection. Their folks are finding a way. And right now, the manual way fills gaps, right? And over time, things will be even more and more automated, even more and more human readable, and probably more and more trusted as we go along.
And I think that one area of disagreement is perhaps in types of smart contracts. I tend to divide them up into 3 buckets of, there's the Bitcoin-like contract, which is very, very simple. If you own this public key, you can have this Bitcoin. And then there's the very complex smart contracts like Ethereum or Bloq Aura, which is essentially a totally different programming language that's executed in a faux virtual environment that achieves a deterministic result. And then the third type is domain-specific language, or DSL, which is, again, it's a computer evaluatable, if that's a word, set of rules, conditions, actions that you can prove if you're a party to that contract. Now, which of those 3 is better for a specific situation? Now, I guarantee you that you'll get, those 3 options, you'll get 6 opinions based on who you're talking to at any point in time. Is each has their advantages, their disadvantages, and some are too micro-focused, some are too generic, some don't necessarily fit the application at hand. And so there's a lot of disagreement, I would say, among firms as to what's the best path. But again, looping back to an earlier question, it's early days. There's a lot of innovation, and we're just figuring out which types of contracts best apply to which situations.
Good. All right. Thank you. So last question before we open up, and be very brief. What's going to be the killer app of the smart contract?
Identity. For the first time in history, we have a shared permissionless, transparent, non-repudiable global database resource that we think and hope will last for some number of decades, potentially, if all goes well. So this is, for the first time in history, the appropriate context for global identity. back at the back of the room, we have Reuven Heck, product manager for our UPort identity project, and it's essentially a container for reputational attributes, things about you that you control, and reputational attestations, things that other entities say about your attributes or about your conduct in different kinds of transactions. So it can be lending, borrowing, repaying, working together in our governance tool on a software project. And effectively, this sort of system enables the in excess of 2 billion people around the world who don't have identity to establish their own user-centric, self-sovereign identity on the public blockchain. It enables people in the developed world to establish an identity that, again, they control, and they have the ability to ensconce encrypted pieces of data in. So instead of Mark and Sergey and Larry owning your identity and monetizing your identity, we're building systems that will enable you to do the same for yourself. So effectively, in the developing world, identity plus persistent portable reputation will, for the first time in history, enable different people who didn't have access to the global financial system to become enfranchised.
If Joe didn't say that first, I would have said it. But since he said it first, I have to agree. I think identity is a killer app. Maybe 2018, certainly. But I think provenance is a really interesting kind of backdrop for applications. Whether it's geez, I just was in LaGuardia Airport. I had a bad chicken sandwich. Where did that chicken come from? And being able to snap a picture of the food label.
You don't want to know.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. When you take a picture with your app and see that it wasn't the chicken, it was actually the lettuce, right? Mm. So being able to track back and kind of improve the quality of food. I don't think, where identity will start to hit, privacy and maybe get into some regulation. I think provenance, whether it's the Kimberley Act, looking for when you go to Zales to buy a diamond, was blood diamonds or slave labor use. Provenance plays in so many, and I think you can act upon that today. So I think provenance and visibility across the supply chain is a very 2017 thing.
I think distributed energy will be big, especially that brings together IoT and the ability to empower individuals to buy their own renewable energy source, tie it into a grid, sell their overcapacity automatically, buy undercapacity when you are throwing a Super Bowl party or something, and it pay out of your escrowed account. And that could also be applied in the third world when they have identity, and financial inclusion can be achieved by, you can imagine small villages pulling together to buy a solar array and plug it into a grid and getting plugged in and getting credit and things like that extended. So I think that's going to be one of the killer apps.
It's funny, a year and a half ago, I think I was on panels with some of the same guys, and the question was, what's blockchain's killer app? Yeah. My answer was smart contracts. Now I have to tell you now I can't say smart contracts is a killer app because we're talking about smart contracts now. So I would say immediately it's OTC financial agreements. It is the place where there's the biggest pain, and this is the most straightforward solution. I think over time, it's reimagining the role that government plays as it extends services to its citizenry. And that can include identity, it can include energy, it can include all these things. And I think if you kind of look at what the market is saying, the signals coming from the market, we're seeing some major governments, as evidenced by, obviously I'll pitch my own book, what we're doing in Delaware, what's recently been announced in Illinois, what's been announced in Dubai. I think we have a representative from Dubai here in the audience today. Even Russia has a blockchain ombudsperson. So I think that we'll see that there's a really interesting opportunity to reimagine how government interacts and drive those services in a much more efficient fashion. I mean, we talk about voting and empowering those who don't have bank accounts. How about their access to be able to vote in a democracy in a way? And smart contracts can really drive that home.
Jeff, the last word.
Well, Bloq, we try to be very pragmatic, and so far there's a system that's been working for over 7 years, battle tested, that secures $12 billion in value based on smart contracts. That's Bitcoin. And so it's already been proven in the field, and it works. Smart contracts we know work. And what is the next killer app? I think that's up to all of us on stage to develop.
All right, so thank you, gentlemen. Opening it up for questions. We have a lot of questions. So how would I pick? One here.
Speaking about identity and laying reputation on top of identity, that feels kind of dangerous to me because you've automatically created half of the population who has a worse reputation than the other half. And it feels like those people have a problem. And because they have it's just automatically that they're going to have a worse reputation than the other half. Half the people are going to have good, half the people are going to have less good.
So you're saying no reputation's a bad reputation?
No, I'm saying if you have 100 people, 50 of them are going to have less good reputation than the 50 at the top. So you've automatically created half and half.
Don't people have credit scores now?
What's the difference?
Is that a bad system?
Yeah.
And it's immutable and it's public. How do I ever recover from that?
Oh, okay, that's a question. How do you recover from a bad rep on a smart contract platform?
Behave better?
Yeah. Yeah.
I try.
All right, one more question here.
What about instances of government and the use of reputations? If you look at a country like China, China is rating its citizens according to how pro-Chinese government they are. Do you see that being an issue? Or what is your view on that question?
Can you repeat? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
repeat
so,
the question before.
When you have identity and reputation systems
can you repeat the
on
question
the,
for everybody?
I'm doing it. When you have identity and reputation systems on the blockchain, what happens if government has too much control of those systems? For instance, in China, there is a system in place right now. It's optional, but it's a pretty scary system. It rates people, and your reputation affects your friends and family negatively, potentially. So my solution to that, and it's early days in building public decentralized identity and reputation, my solution to that is decentralize it. So you have lots of different systems, lots of different local reputation systems. There can be a lending platform that has its own reputation system, an Amazon-like store, etc. Lots of different ways of creating financial reputation, ways of creating gamer reputation and software developer reputation. But sticking with financial, you can have all of this data that is potentially open and accessible, and you can have a layer on top of that that aggregates, that tracks and aggregates those things. And as long as it isn't one entity that is building the weighted aggregating and tracking score, if you have many different entities, then you can choose which ones you want to trust, and you can choose which ones you want to use for different purposes.
And the reputation systems are have reputations themselves. So if a reputation system is giving people bad reputations for no good reason, guess what? Their score in weighting goes down. So people say, hey, this is a crappy source for reputations. Its reputation goes down. Its weighting of your overall reputation will not impact you.
So how many layers of reputation are you going to have?
I think jumping to reputation is a logical step to come. I think identity verification is to me a very productive place to start. I mean, we all have relationships, whether it's through the motor vehicle, which without a license you're not going to get on that plane, to the bank that we have a mortgage with. Well, whether you like the bank or not, they lend you the money, you have to pay them back. So there is ways to set up networks by which we can verify. And I go back to the the driver's license at the bar again. Being able to verify without providing all the information, and also having it command and control on the citizen side, right? So I can say who is part of my team, and I can kind of do that dynamically. And I think the NIST cybersecurity framework describes a lot of that, and I actually think they did a pretty good job of describing how to keep the citizen in center and what the role is of the various verifiers or reputation agents, et cetera.
Good, thank you. One more question. I'm looking for a woman because we don't have women on the right here. Thank you.
So Web 1.0. Oh, sorry. I only heard parts of it, but as we move towards a decentralized World Wide Web, what does that imply for this technology, for our companies, et cetera? Is that roughly it? So Web 1.0 was basically a static shared information system, publishing system. Web 2.0 brought in interactivity, eventually social, mobile. Web 3.0 is just going to be the World Wide Web. Nobody's going to adopt blockchain. People are going to get interested in using applications like identity, like prediction markets, potentially like platforms for crowdsourcing, funding, insurance, etc. People are just going to like those applications, and those applications will, many of those will be built on a back end of these decentralizing technologies. So Web 3.0 is the decentralized World Wide Web, and certainly there are still static web pages out there. There's still Web 1.0 out there. This will just be a new way of interacting with each other.
Questions? More questions? Over there, yes. You, yep.
I had a question for Jerry. For some of smart contracts that don't really lend themselves to the logic that we have now, I'm wondering if your company in particular has investigated big data, any of those kinds of technologies, cognitive computing, that might be able to bridge that link between the sort of basic rule-oriented to some of the agreements that have to have a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, so the question was how we thought about additional technologies like big data, cognitive, in maybe reimagining how, instead of do you want fries with that, blockchain just being another additive, being a game changer. The answer is yes. It's not straightforward. I mean, in some cases, doing analytics on a blockchain where it's decentralized, that implies perhaps some centralized agent is actually watching over the ledger, which wouldn't be a good thing, right? So, but in a permissioned ledger environment, there is the role of the auditor, which, based on the governance of the group, there is an entity, maybe an oracle, that is given permission to actually, on behalf of the other members, to observe things. Maybe, again, going back to my KYC AML, is G Cuomo, J Cuomo, Gennaro Cuomo, Jerry Cuomo, all the same person, and maybe perform a task like entity analytics. Perhaps we can see things like that coming through. So I think it's, again, even like my question, it's not just the simple application of cognitive or big data. You have to reimagine that in the context of a blockchain. And again, from that, the smart contracts are key, especially around who shares what, roles, responsibility, all around governance. And I think network management, the whole rules of the team sport of a permissioned blockchain are fascinating, right? And how the rules, the roles, how smart contracts are actually deployed. Do you need majority signature? Is there one? So I think a lot of interesting things. But when you start solving those problems, things like big data, analytics, cognitive become possible. And we're just starting to see the tip of that iceberg.
One more question. Yes.
So smart contracts are an interesting process of an assured processing to modify the truth. It's a good way to think of it. But there's a second piece to that statement, which is based on a set of known inputs. Can you talk a little bit about how we provide cybersecurity controls for the input side, the interface between the smart contract and rest of world? Because it strikes me that's the place that's amazingly broken, as we work with the fundamental concepts of unknown compute today.
So one of the ways we're trying to tackle that is through we call them cryptlets, and there's a certain type of cryptlet, but it runs in an enclave, so it's a secure, isolated area on silicon that that runs some logic, produces some output that can be fed into a blockchain, and it is attested at the hardware level that whatever this output was, it ran unmodified, and it was not tampered with, and we attest to the output of this with full signatures. So and at some point you have to have financial guarantees behind. If you sign up to use this cryptlet and or this infrastructure, and you're getting these data feeds, if for some reason, just bring up the LIBOR scandal, somebody was manipulating the truth or an input into. That's an example of not the whole formula, but just one input being manipulated, and that's the role that we're trying to facilitate. You can't solve that within a closed system. You do have to inject secure information into a blockchain, and how do you do that? And then how do you make sure it's traceable so that something at some point goes wrong, you have recourse. Yeah. So all of that's being built into this core infrastructure that we're building. I'm sure others are thinking about this as well.
And there's enterprise processes related to that as well. The standard soundbite is on the blockchain. No one knows you're a refrigerator, right? And so it's that question or soundbite really circles around digital identity. How secure is that digital identity? If it's just a single key, if someone swipes that key, you have an identity theft. And so with larger enterprise clients, you wind up building human-based processes, standard information security processes around the management of identities, around the management of keys. And yet again, we're breaking new ground every day in the Bitcoin industry, the blockchain industry, smart contract and digital identity industries. How do we secure those identities? And so that's very much a work in progress. There's a lot, everyone on this panel has done some work along those lines, but digital identity is going to be so central to everyone's life, whether it's blockchain or not, smart contract or not. We're all going to have digital identities on our smartphones, in our everyday life, in our banking relationships. And so this is something as an IT industry that we have to polish, we have to work on, because digital is coming whether we like it or not. So it's something that we have to solve.
So we are out of time. I know we have a lot of questions, so that's why we have the networking activities. So I wanted to thank the panel for your insight, for agreeing to disagree, yeah, and for helping with my teenage daughter. Thank you.